Corporal Jake Santos had been calculating his odds of survival in increasingly depressing mathematical terms for the past 3 days, and the numbers weren't improving with experience. His transport ship lay scattered across 2 square kilometers of Zirian 7's unforgiving desert, its debris field creating the kind of modern art installation that would have been impressive if it wasn't also a monument to his spectacularly bad luck with atmospheric entry. Day 4, he said aloud to his personal recorder, partly for official documentation and mostly because talking to himself had become the primary entertainment available on a planet where the landscape featured 47 different shades of beige and the local wildlife consisted primarily of things that wanted to eat him. Water reserves down to approximately 200 milliliters. Food supplies exhausted. Morale could be better. Jake lifted his canteen, feeling the pathetic slosh of liquid that represented the difference between surviving long enough for rescue and becoming another cautionary tale about why pilots should pay more attention to surface-to-air missile warnings. The rescue beacon was functioning, assuming anyone was close enough to receive the signal and cared enough about one stranded corporal to mount a retrieval operation in contested space. Note for future reference, he continued, checking his compass against the sun's position, when transport pilots say they can definitely avoid the Valerian patrol sectors, ask for their definition of definitely. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd been shot down while carrying medical supplies to human settlements that were struggling to coexist with Valerian refugees in the Outer Rim territories. The war between humans and Valorians had been grinding on for over a decade, with both sides accumulating grudges and casualties in roughly equal measure, but Jake had volunteered for humanitarian missions because someone needed to remember that not everyone on either side was actively shooting at the other. His philosophical reflection on interspecies conflict was interrupted by movement near a cluster of red-orange rocks that had been serving as landmarks in an otherwise featureless landscape. Jake adjusted his field glasses and felt his stomach drop as he recognized the distinctive silhouette of a Valerian warrior, even at distance. Valorians were built like someone had decided that humans needed to be more intimidating and had commissioned evolution to make improvements. They averaged 7 feet in height, with muscle density that made heavy gravity adaptation look casual, and their natural armor plating could deflect small arms fire without noticeable inconvenience. This particular Valerian appeared to be female, based on the more streamlined armor configuration, but Jake's survival training had emphasized that Valerian gender distinctions were largely irrelevant when you were being shot at by either variety. Day 4 Addendum, Jake said to his recorder, Valerian contact approximately 500 meters northeast. Adjusting survival estimates accordingly. He expected the warrior to either attack immediately or move away to avoid human contact, but instead she seemed to stumble, catching herself against the rocks with movements that suggested exhaustion rather than tactical positioning. Through his field glasses, Jake could see that her normally pristine armor showed signs of damage and neglect, and her posture indicated someone who had been walking for far longer than was advisable in desert conditions. She's in trouble, Jake realized, feeling unwelcome sympathy for someone who represented everything his military training had taught him to consider a threat. Jake watched the Valerian warrior attempt to continue walking, only to collapse near a cluster of weathered boulders that provided minimal shade from Zirian 7's relentless sun. She lay still for several minutes, and Jake found himself checking his canteen again while calculating distances, survival probabilities, and the likelihood that approaching a potentially hostile alien would result in anything other than his immediate death. This is a terrible idea, he announced to no one in particular, then began walking toward the rocks where the Valerian had fallen. The approach took 20 minutes of careful movement across terrain that seemed designed to twist ankles and hide venomous creatures, but the warrior showed no signs of awareness as Jake drew closer. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her armor's bioluminescent status indicators showing patterns that Jake interpreted as severe dehydration based on his limited knowledge of Valerian physiology. "Hey," Jake called softly, staying outside the range of immediate retaliation while trying to determine if she was conscious. "Are you alive?" The Valorian's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Jake with obvious effort. She was younger than he'd expected, with features that combined predatory efficiency with something that might have been considered beautiful if she hadn't been clearly capable of tearing him into manageable pieces. "Human," she said in accented standard, her voice carrying the harmonics that characterized Valerian speech. Come to gloat over fallen enemy? Actually, Jake said, studying her condition with the eye of someone who'd learned to recognize the stages of heat exhaustion, I came to see if you needed help. Her laugh was bitter and dry. Kithra of Clan Valdris needs no assistance from soft-skinned starcrawlers. Kithra of Clan Valdris looks like she's about 6 hours from dying of dehydration, Jake observed, noting the telltale signs of advanced water depletion that he recognized from his own deteriorating condition. Pride doesn't generate moisture. Kithra attempted to sit up, managed about halfway, then settled back against the rocks with obvious frustration. Better to die with honor than accept charity from enemies. Jake looked at his canteen, then at the alien warrior whose species had been killing humans for over a decade, then back at the pathetic amount of water that represented his own slim chance of survival. The mathematics were straightforward: sharing his water would probably doom them both, while keeping it for himself might extend his life by perhaps a day or two. Yeah, well, Jake said, unscrewing the cap of his canteen, sometimes honor is overrated. He knelt beside Kithra and offered the container, watching her eyes widen as she processed what he was proposing. Your last water, she said, understanding immediately that his canteen represented the difference between life and death for both of them. You would give it to Valerian warrior? I would give it to someone who needs it, Jake corrected, holding the canteen steady despite the voice in his head screaming about survival priorities and species loyalty. Drink. Kithra's eyes locked with his as she accepted the canteen, her gaze carrying intensity that seemed to look directly into his thoughts. When her lips touched the metal rim, Jake felt something shift in the air between them, not romantic, but something deeper and more fundamental that transcended species boundaries. She drank carefully, taking only enough to relieve her immediate distress before attempting to return the canteen. Finish it, Jake said quietly. You need it more than I do right now. This is not simple kindness, Kithra said after drinking the remaining water, her voice carrying new strength along with something that sounded like reverence. This is gift of life from enemy who could have chosen survival over mercy. It's just water, Jake said, though he was beginning to suspect that Kithra's reaction went beyond simple gratitude. No, Kithra replied, sitting up with renewed energy as her eyes blazed with intensity that made Jake suddenly aware he was dealing with cultural forces he didn't understand. This is sacred debt that binds honor to honor across species divide. She placed her hand over her heart in a gesture that Jake recognized from intelligence briefings as formal oath-taking, her voice taking on the ceremonial cadence of someone invoking ancient traditions. Kithra of Clan Valdris swears life debt to Jake Santos of Earth, she announced, her words carrying weight that seemed to make the desert air itself pay attention. Your mercy preserves my life, therefore my life belongs to your protection. From this moment until my last breath, I am shield and sword in your service. Jake stared at her, processing implications that his survival training had definitely not covered. I'm sorry, what now? You gave your life's water to preserve mine, Kithra explained, her expression carrying the gravity of someone stating fundamental laws of reality. Life debt must be honored. I am now bound by sacred oath to protect you with my strength, my skill, and my life if necessary. That's really not necessary, Jake said quickly, realizing that his act of compassion had created complications that made simple survival look straightforward by comparison. I don't need a bodyguard. Need is irrelevant, Kithra replied, rising to her feet with the fluid grace of someone whose physical capabilities had been fully restored by the water. Oath is binding. You have guardian whether you desire one or not. Jake looked around the empty desert, at the scattered remains of his transport, and at the alien warrior whose honor code had apparently just made her his personal protector for life. Day 4, final addendum, he said to his recorder, situation has become significantly more complicated than originally anticipated. Kithra's answering smile showed teeth that were definitely designed for combat efficiency, but her eyes held warmth that suggested Jake had gained more than just protection. He'd acquired a companion whose dedication would redefine both their understanding of what it meant to survive in a universe where the line between enemy and ally could be erased by a single act of compassion. 3 days into what Jake had started calling the partnership he never asked for, He'd learned that traveling with a Valerian warrior bound by life-debt oath was like having a personal bodyguard who treated every grain of sand as a potential assassination attempt. Kithra's dedication to his protection had redefined the meaning of thorough, transforming simple desert survival into an elaborate security operation that would have impressed military strategists. "You cannot walk point," Kithra announced for the 7th time that morning as they prepared to continue their journey toward the coordinates where Jake's emergency beacon suggested rescue ships might attempt retrieval. "Point position exposes you to maximum danger from predators, environmental hazards, and potential hostile contacts." "It's a desert," Jake replied with the patience of someone who'd been having variations of this conversation since their partnership began. "The biggest threat is dehydration, which we're both facing equally." "No," Kithra corrected, adjusting the improvised shelter she'd constructed from his ship's debris with engineering skills that surpassed anything in Jake's survival training. "Biggest threat is anything that might harm Oathholder. My life has meaning only through preservation of yours." Jake had initially assumed that Kithra's life-debt commitment would fade as the immediate crisis passed, but 3 days of constant vigilance had convinced him that Valerian honor codes operated on principles that made human stubbornness look casual by comparison. She insisted on taking first watch every night, eating smaller food portions despite her larger size, and maintaining constant awareness of their surroundings that bordered on supernatural. "Kithra," Jake said carefully, "I appreciate the protection, but you're going to exhaust yourself trying to guard against every possible threat. We need to share responsibilities if we're both going to survive." "Oathholder's survival is sole responsibility," she replied, scanning the horizon with the intensity of someone expecting imminent attack from multiple directions. "Your duty is to remain alive. My duty is to ensure your duty succeeds." Their philosophical discussion about survival responsibilities was interrupted by movement in the distance, a dust cloud that suggested approaching vehicles traveling at speeds that implied either rescue operations or military patrols. Jake activated his emergency beacon's directional signal while Kithra immediately positioned herself between him and the approaching contact, her hand moving to weapons that could probably level small buildings. "Could be rescue ships," Jake observed hopefully. "Could be hunting party," Kithra countered grimly. "Standard protocol is to assume hostile intent until proven otherwise." The approaching vehicles resolved into a mixed convoy of human and Valerian craft, suggesting either unprecedented cooperation or a very confused military engagement. Jake recognized the markings of the Outer Rim Medical Corps on the lead transport, while Kithra identified Valerian clan symbols that indicated refugee escort duties rather than military operations. "Medical evacuation and refugee transport," Jake said with relief. "Definitely friendlies." "No such thing as definitely friendly when Oathholder is involved," Kithra replied, though she relaxed her combat stance slightly as the convoy approached their position. The lead vehicle contained Dr. Sarah Chen, whom Jake recognized from previous humanitarian missions, along with Valerian clan leader Veltar, whose presence suggested this was one of the joint operations that had been attempting to provide aid to mixed settlements throughout the contested territories. "Corporal Santos, Dr. Chen called as she exited her transport, "We received your emergency beacon 4 days ago. Are you injured?" "Mostly dehydrated and suffering from involuntary career reassignment," Jake replied, then gestured toward Kithra. "I've also acquired a Valerian life-debt guardian who takes her job very seriously." Veltar's attention focused on Kithra with the intensity of someone evaluating a complex political situation. The two Valorians exchanged rapid conversation in their native language, with Kithra's responses becoming increasingly formal and defensive. "Problem?" Jake asked, noting the tension building between the clan leader and his self-appointed protector. "Kithra claims life debt to human enemy," Veltar said in heavily accented standard, his tone suggesting disapproval that went beyond simple cultural differences. "This breaks clan loyalty. Makes her outcast from Valerian honor." "She saved my life," Jake said firmly. "Multiple times. That should count for something in anyone's honor system." "Life debt given to wrong species," Veltar replied. "Humans are enemies of Valerian people. Cannot honor oath that betrays clan solidarity." Jake felt Kithra's tension spike as she realized that her life-debt oath had created political complications that threatened her standing within Valerian society. Her dedication to protecting him had marked her as a traitor to her own people's interests. The oath was given according to ancient traditions, Kithra said with dignity that couldn't hide her pain at being rejected by her clan leader. Jake Santos preserved my life when he could have chosen personal survival. Life debt supersedes clan politics. Ancient traditions do not apply to enemy species, Veltar countered. You will return to clan territory for judgment. Human will be transferred to medical care. No, Kithra said simply, positioning herself between Veltar and Jake with movements that suggested she was prepared to fight her own clan leader if necessary. Oath is binding. Separation from oathholder is violation of sacred duty. Dr. Chen looked between the three of them with the expression of someone who'd walked into a cultural crisis that medical training hadn't prepared her to handle. Perhaps we could find a compromise that respects both Valerian traditions and practical survival needs. There is no compromise with oath-breaking, Veltar said coldly. Kithra chooses human protection over clan loyalty. She is no longer Valerian warrior. Jake felt the weight of unintended consequences as he realized that accepting Kithra's protection had cost her everything she'd known about identity and belonging. Her life-debt oath had transformed her from honored clan member to outcast refugee whose only remaining connection was to the human she'd sworn to protect. Then she comes with me, Jake said, making a decision that surprised everyone present including himself. If the life-debt oath is real, then I accept responsibility for her welfare just like she accepted responsibility for mine. Kithra's expression shifted through several configurations that Jake was learning to recognize as profound emotional processing. You would accept exile warrior as permanent companion? Despite political complications? I would accept a friend who's proven her dedication, Jake corrected. Politics can figure itself out later. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. The medical corps has protocols for handling interspecies cooperation cases. We can provide transport and documentation for both of you. Veltar's disapproval was evident, but clan law apparently didn't extend to preventing voluntary exile. Kithra of Clan Valdris is no longer recognized as clan member. Her choices are her responsibility. My choices honor ancient traditions more than modern politics, Kithra replied with pride that transcended her obvious pain at losing clan status. Life debt creates bonds stronger than birth clan. As the convoy prepared to depart Zirian, 7, Jake found himself reflecting on how sharing his last drops of water had created obligations and relationships that neither human nor Valerian political structures knew how to categorize. Having any regrets about the whole life debt guardian situation? Dr. Chen asked as she treated Jake's dehydration while Kithra maintained vigilant watch over the medical procedures. Jake looked at Kithra, who had sacrificed her place in Valerian society to honor an oath given to someone her people considered an enemy, and felt certainty that transcended simple gratitude. No regrets, he said firmly. Some bonds are worth the complications they create. Through the transport's viewport, the desert of Zirian, 7 receded behind them while Jake and Kithra began the process of figuring out how to build a partnership that honored both human independence and Valerian concepts of duty in a universe that hadn't yet learned to accommodate relationships that transcended species boundaries. 2 weeks after leaving Zirian, 7, Jake had learned that integrating a Valerian life debt guardian into human society was like trying to explain quantum physics to someone whose worldview was based entirely on Newtonian mechanics, theoretically possible, but requiring patience that approached the supernatural. The Outer Rim Medical Corps had been accommodating about Kithra's unprecedented status, but finding productive roles for an exiled warrior whose primary qualification was absolute dedication to protecting one specific human had proven challenging. The housing situation is unique, Dr. Chen explained as she reviewed the administrative paperwork that Kithra's presence had generated. Valerian physiology requires different environmental controls, her weapons need specialized storage facilities, and she's refused quarters that don't provide direct sight lines to your accommodations. Jake nodded, having discovered that Kithra interpreted rest and recovery as maintain constant surveillance while pretending to relax. Their shared living space resembled a small military command center more than standard medical corps housing, with Kithra having reorganized the furniture to optimize defensive positions and escape routes. "She's adapting," Jake said, though adaptation might have been generous characterization of Kithra's approach to human society. "Learning to trust that not everyone represents a potential threat to my well-being." "I heard she interrogated the mess hall chef about food preparation procedures," Dr. Chen said with amusement. "Specifically, whether any ingredients might be toxic to human physiology." "She takes the life debt oath seriously," Jake confirmed. "Very seriously." Their conversation was interrupted by Kithra herself, who entered the medical bay with the controlled grace that characterized all her movements and immediately positioned herself where she could monitor both entrances while maintaining visual contact with Jake. "Dr. Chen," Kithra said formally, "I request information about Jake's medical treatment schedule. Life debt requires comprehensive understanding of oathholders' health maintenance needs." "Kithra," Jake said gently, "we've talked about this. Dr. Chen is trying to help, not harm. You don't need to evaluate every medical procedure for potential threats." "Vigilance is not optional," Kithra replied, though her tone carried affection that had developed over their weeks together. "Oathholders' welfare depends on constant assessment of risk factors." Dr. Chen smiled diplomatically. "Actually, I wanted to discuss something that might interest both of you. We've received a request for assistance at the New Harmony settlement. It's a joint human-Valorian community that's been struggling with integration challenges." Jake felt Kithra's immediate tension as she processed the implications of working with mixed populations that included her own species. Her exile from clan structure had left her in a liminal space where she belonged fully to neither human nor Valorian society. "What kind of assistance?" Jake asked, noting Kithra's careful attention to the conversation. "Cultural mediation," Dr. Chen explained. "The settlement has been experiencing conflicts between human and Valorian residents over everything from resource allocation to child-rearing practices. They need people who understand both perspectives." "I understand human perspectives," Jake said, "but I'm hardly an expert on Valorian culture." "However," Dr. Chen continued, "you've developed a working relationship with a Valorian warrior that transcends the usual political barriers. That experience might be valuable for helping others navigate similar relationships." Kithra's bioluminescent patterns, which Jake had learned to read as emotional indicators, shifted to configurations that suggested deep thought mixed with uncertainty. "Settlement work would require interaction with clan Valorians," she said carefully. "Exiled warriors are not welcome in traditional community structures." "But you're not approaching as a traditional clan member," Jake pointed out. "You're approaching as someone who's successfully created a new kind of relationship that honors both human and Valorian values." "Partnership between enemy species is not traditional Valorian value," Kithra replied, though Jake detected hope beneath her caution. "Maybe it should be," Jake said, feeling the weight of possibility as he considered how their unlikely bond might serve as a model for others struggling with similar challenges. "Maybe what we've learned about cooperation could help other people figure out how to build bridges instead of walls." The journey to New Harmony took 2 days through space that remained contested between human and Valorian territorial claims, with both species maintaining wary neutrality in regions where refugees and settlers were attempting to establish mixed communities. "Nervous?" Jake asked as their transport approached the settlement, noting Kithra's increased vigilance as they prepared to encounter the first Valorian civilians she'd faced since her exile. "Clan rejection is difficult," Kithra admitted, her usual confidence tempered by uncertainty about how her own people would receive an exile warrior traveling with human companions. "But oath supersedes personal comfort." New Harmony turned out to be a fascinating example of what happened when two species attempted cooperation without adequate understanding of each other's social structures. The settlement showed clear divisions between human and Valorian residential areas, with minimal integration and obvious tension that suggested that harmony in the name was more aspirational than descriptive. "Welcome to our little experiment in interspecies cooperation," said Mayor Collins, a human administrator whose expression suggested the experiment had been more challenging than anticipated. "We're hoping you can help us address some cultural friction that's been developing. What kind of friction? Jake asked, noting how Valerian and human residents maintained careful distance from each other despite sharing the same physical space. Resource disputes, mainly, Collins explained. Valorians prioritize communal sharing, while humans prefer individual allocation. Both sides think the other is being selfish or wasteful. Kithra observed the settlement's layout with the analytical eye of someone trained to assess social dynamics as potential security factors. Separation creates suspicion, she said quietly. Neither side understands others' motivations. Their first day in New Harmony revealed the depth of misunderstanding that had developed between the two communities. Humans interpreted Valerian communal practices as attempts to control individual choices, while Valorians viewed human individualism as rejection of community responsibility. They're not trying to be difficult, Jake explained to a group of frustrated human settlers. Valerian culture emphasizes collective welfare because individual survival depends on group strength. And humans aren't being selfish, Kithra told a gathering of concerned Valerian families. Individual responsibility is how they ensure everyone contributes fairly to community welfare. The breakthrough came when Jake and Kithra demonstrated their own partnership as an example of how different approaches to responsibility could complement rather than conflict with each other. Jake provides individual initiative that identifies problems before they become crises, Kithra explained to the mixed group. I provide collective security that ensures solutions can be implemented safely. Different strengths, Jake added, that work better together than either could achieve alone. But you are life-debt bound, observed Thyros, a Valerian elder whose tone suggested skepticism about the broader applicability of their relationship. Sacred oaths create obligations that normal cooperation cannot duplicate. The oath formalized what we'd already chosen, Jake replied. Mutual respect, shared responsibility, and commitment to each other's welfare. Those choices are available to anyone willing to make them. The settlement's transformation didn't happen overnight, but Jake and Kithra's presence provided a working model for how human independence and Valerian collectivism could enhance rather than threaten each other. They established mixed work groups that combined individual expertise with collective planning, creating solutions that neither species could have developed independently. You know, Jake said to Kithra as they watched human and Valerian children playing together with the easy cooperation that adults found so challenging, I think we might be better at this mediation work than either of us expected. Partnership creates strength, Kithra agreed, her bioluminescent patterns displaying contentment that Jake had learned to associate with her satisfaction in work well done. Oath teaches both honor and flexibility. Think you could get used to being a cultural bridge builder instead of a warrior? Kithra considered the question while watching the settlement's residents work together on projects that would have been impossible without cooperation between species. Bridge building is warrior work, she said finally. Different enemies, same duty to protect what matters. As evening settled over New Harmony, Jake reflected on how sharing his last drops of water had led to discovering that some partnerships could transform not just individual lives but entire communities, willing to learn that cooperation was possible when built on mutual respect and shared commitment to something larger than themselves. 6 months after the New Harmony mediation, Jake and Kithra had established themselves as the Outer Rim's most effective interspecies conflict resolution team, though Jake suspected their success had more to do with their unusual partnership than any formal training in diplomacy. Word of their work had spread throughout the contested territories, attracting requests from settlements struggling with integration challenges that conventional diplomatic approaches couldn't address. The Kepler station situation is complex, Dr. Chen explained as she briefed them on their latest assignment during a supply stop at Medical Corps headquarters. Human and Valerian authorities are both claiming jurisdiction over the same refugee populations, and neither side trusts traditional negotiators. Jake nodded, reviewing the case files that showed escalating tensions between species that had been cooperating successfully until political pressures from their respective governments began undermining local cooperation. Let me guess, Jake said, both sides want to separate the mixed families and relocate people according to species rather than established community relationships. Exactly, Dr. Chen confirmed. And the refugees themselves are caught between loyalty to their birth species and commitment to the integrated communities they've built. Kithra studied the station's schematics with the tactical awareness that characterized her approach to any new environment. Forced separation destroys trust foundation that mixed communities require for survival, she observed. Politicians create division to serve distant interests. Think we can convince both governments that their policies are counterproductive? Jake asked, though he suspected that political logic and practical results operated in different dimensions of reality. We convince communities to demonstrate strength of integration, Kithra replied. Politicians follow successful examples when failure of alternatives becomes obvious. The approach to Kepler Station revealed the scale of the challenge they faced, two separate fleets maintaining defensive positions around a civilian facility, with human and Valerian military forces treating the refugee situation as a territorial dispute rather than a humanitarian crisis. Ambassador Santos, came the formal greeting from Captain Morrison, representing human colonial authority, were prepared to evacuate all human refugees to proper resettlement facilities away from alien influence. Clan Commander Zephyr, announced the Valerian fleet leader, we demand return of Valerian refugees who have been corrupted by human individualistic philosophies. Jake looked at Kithra, who had been observing the political posturing with the expression of someone watching children argue over toys while ignoring the serious responsibilities they were supposed to be handling. With respect to both commanders, Jake said diplomatically, we'd like to speak with the refugees themselves before anyone makes decisions about their future. They might have perspectives that aren't being represented in the current negotiations. The refugees don't understand the broader political implications, Captain Morrison replied. Human civilians require protection from alien cultural contamination. Valerian refugees need reintegration with proper clan structures, Commander Zephyr added. Mixed communities weaken traditional bonds that ensure survival. Kithra's bioluminescent patterns shifted to configurations that Jake recognized as barely controlled frustration. Perhaps commanders would benefit from observing actual mixed community before determining what refugees require, she suggested with diplomatic courtesy that carried undertones of steel. The refugee representatives who met with Jake and Kithra told a different story than either military command expected. Families had formed across species lines, with human and Valerian adults sharing child-rearing responsibilities, combining resources for mutual benefit, and developing hybrid cultural practices that strengthened rather than weakened their communities. My children learn both human innovation and Valerian honor codes, explained Maria Santos, a human engineer whose family unit included her Valerian partner Kethval and their adopted children from both species. They're growing up stronger because they understand multiple approaches to problem solving. Mixed education produces superior outcomes, Kethval confirmed, his formal Valerian speech patterns softened by months of integration with human communication styles. Human flexibility complements Valerian discipline to create adaptive strength. Jake and Kithra spent 3 days documenting the refugees' actual experiences rather than political assumptions about their welfare, building evidence that integration had created sustainable communities rather than cultural corruption. The data is compelling, Jake reported to both fleet commanders during a joint communication session. Mixed communities show lower crime rates, higher productivity, and better resource management than segregated settlements. Statistics don't address cultural integrity concerns, Captain Morrison replied stubbornly. Cultural integrity requires strength to adapt to changing circumstances, Kithra countered, her warrior background lending authority to her assessment. Communities that cannot integrate new elements become brittle and break under pressure. The deadlock was broken when the refugee families themselves requested formal audience with both fleet commanders, presenting a united petition that demonstrated their commitment to maintaining integration despite political pressures. We understand the concerns about cultural purity, Maria Santos addressed both commanders with respectful firmness, but our children are living proof that different traditions can strengthen each other rather than compete. Separation would destroy family bonds that transcend species categories, Kethval added. Honor demands protection of established relationships, not adherence to abstract political theories. The turning point came when Jake made a proposal that surprised everyone present. What if we establish Kepler Station as a pilot program for formal interspecies integration? Let the communities continue developing their hybrid approaches while both governments study the results. A testing ground for integration policies, Captain Morrison said slowly, processing the implications. Demonstration project that proves viability of mixed communities, Commander Zephyr translated, his tactical mind recognizing the strategic value of documented success. Kithara stepped forward, her presence commanding attention from both military leaders. Jake Santos and I represent proof that human-Valorian partnerships can honor both species' values while creating new forms of strength. We offer to remain as permanent cultural liaisons, ensuring both governments receive accurate information about integration outcomes. The agreement reached at Kepler Station established precedents that transformed interspecies relations throughout the Outer Rim territories. Instead of forced separation, mixed communities received official recognition and support, while Jake and Kithara's partnership became the model for cultural liaison programs that helped other species navigate integration challenges. Any regrets about becoming professional bridge builders? Jake asked Kithara as they reviewed reports from a dozen successful integration projects that had developed using their methods. Bridge building honors life debt oath in ways I never anticipated, Kithara replied, her bioluminescent patterns displaying deep satisfaction. Protecting oath holder requires protecting communities that support his welfare. Which means protecting everyone who's trying to build something better than what they inherited, Jake observed, understanding how Kithara's warrior code had evolved to encompass responsibilities that extended far beyond individual protection. 2 years after sharing his last drops of water with a dying alien warrior, Jake stood in the observation deck of the newly established Interspecies Cooperation Institute, watching ships arrive daily carrying families from both species who wanted to learn integration techniques that had proven successful throughout the contested territories. You know, he said to Kithara as they prepared for another day of helping strangers learn to trust each other across species boundaries, when I gave you that water, I thought I was just preventing someone from dying of dehydration. You were preserving foundation for everything that followed, Kithara replied, her hand finding his shoulder in the gesture that had begun their partnership. One act of mercy created ripples that continue spreading. Outside the Institute's windows, human and Valerian children played together in gardens that combined the agricultural techniques of both species, their laughter proof that some bonds could transcend every boundary when nurtured by people willing to choose cooperation over conflict. Jake had been transformed from a stranded pilot into someone who understood that accepting responsibility for another person's welfare meant accepting responsibility for creating a world where such relationships could flourish. Kithara had evolved from an exiled warrior into a bridge between cultures whose honor now encompassed not just personal loyalty but the broader work of building peace. Ready for today's orientation session? Jake asked, preparing to welcome another group of families who wanted to learn that integration was possible when built on mutual respect and shared commitment. Always ready, Kithara replied, her life debt oath having grown into something that celebrated the strength that came from choosing to protect not just individuals but the communities that made meaningful relationships possible. Together, they headed toward the Institute's main hall, where their partnership continued proving that some acts of compassion were powerful enough to transform enemies into family and create new possibilities for cooperation that neither species could have imagined alone.